Hello everybody, my name is Jackie and welcome to Prairie Sports Talk, the podcast where we talk about sports that directly impact the Canadian Prairie. Today is September 13th, 2024, and after missing last week's episode, we have a lot to catch up on today. So, we are going to open up the episode talking about Labor Day weekend and how that ended up looking in the CFL. We will then talk about Labor Day rematch weekend, which was the weekend after this past weekend. And then we will talk about the CFL Hall of Fame induction ceremony happening tonight. Then we will talk about my predictions for this upcoming week in the CFL. Even though it's a bit of a shorter week, I think we have some very interesting matchups that I'm looking forward to. Then we will close out the episode talking about the Swift Current Broncos season that will be starting on September 20th. We have a lot to talk about today and I'm very excited for this episode. Let's get into it. As expected, Labor Day weekend in the CFL was an absolute blast and we had 4 really fun games that week. So we opened up with what was the closest to being a blowout this week. It was the BC Lions taking on the Ottawa Red Blacks. The BC Lions, they played really good. They really looked like the Grey Cup contender I believe they are. And Nathan Rourke, he looked like Nathan Rourke again. The Lions ended up winning this game 38-12. The Red Blacks didn't play bad, so to say. They played decent, not as good as we have seen this team play this season, but they looked pretty good. They didn't look half bad to say the very least. They looked solid. Drew Brown had somewhat of an underwhelming game. He threw 21 for 33 for 206 yards, and I just want to make a note that Richie Leone, the punter for the Ottawa Red Blacks, went 1 for 1 on passes because he successfully threw on a third down conversion on a trick punt. I love seeing that sort of stuff in football. That stuff gets fans in the seats, and that is the kind of stuff that is great for CFL marketing. I love to see it. The Red Blacks ground game though this week, it really struggled. The Red Blacks leading rusher was Olmstead, who had 7 carries for just 24 yards. That's not going to cut it in the CFL. They had a bunch of other rushers. They had 4 other rushers. Gosselin, Dedman, Crum, and Brown all had at least 1 carry. They all did go for positive yardage in total, but the fact that someone with 24 yards was their leading rusher says all it needs to say about how Ottawa's ground game looked this weekend. Air game looked solid. I mean, like Drew Brown, he's having a good season. He looked solid this week. Bit underwhelming, as I said, but still solid. Their leading receiver this week was Eli Stove, who had 8 receptions for 73 yards. But now let's talk about the masterpiece of a game the BC Lions offense put on. Nathan Rourke looked like Nathan Rourke. He went 21 for 30. That stat, it doesn't necessarily jump off the page. It's pretty average for a CFL quarterback. What does jump off the page, he threw for 325 in just 21 completions. That is absurd. He averaged 10.8 yards per completion, and he threw for 3 touchdowns with just 1 interception. BC also had their ground game going. William Stanback had 20 carries for 93 yards. He looked like the Stanback we've expected to see all season. He looked like the Stanback that we have seen this season. I feel like Montreal made a major mistake letting him go. But at the same time, I feel like it hasn't really come back to bite Montreal yet. But BC picking up Stanback has been huge for them this season. It has given their offense a whole new dimension to their game because it's no longer they can only pass. Because now they have a legitimate running threat in the backfield with Stanback, and now Nathan Rourke, he's one of the most mobile quarterbacks in the CFL. So there's always that threat that he's just going to decide to take off and run for the touchdown himself. This was a very good game for the Lions, and Stanback was not done yet, because through the air, he had 6 receptions for 78 yards. He was their leading receiver this week and their leading rusher. An absolutely stellar game from Stanback. This is the kind of game that a team can build on, both in terms of what Rourke did and in terms of what Stanback did. And it's not like BC's receivers were slacking either. Justin McInnes had a solid game, gained 3 receptions for 72 yards. I mean, like, he's having a great season this year. Earlier this year, you heard me talking about G-Roy Simon comparisons with McInnes, and he has only continued to prove those comparisons right, because since moving to BC, he has looked like a new player. He's been out of his mind. And now we move on to the main event of Labor Day weekend. The second game, although it is still very early in the week, it is still the main attraction of the whole weekend. The Winnipeg Blue Bombers travel to Saskatchewan to take on the Rough Riders in the 59th Labor Day Classic. And this game, well, it lived up to the name Labor Day Classic. It was a really good game. The Bombers led for the majority of the game, but the major story in this one was the Rough Riders' inability to finish. In the last minute of the game, they had 3 chances to take the lead, and they couldn't cash in on any of them. A missed field goal, which was a very long kick, so you can't really blame Lawler for it. And then the Riders recover the onside kick, so they get the ball back. And Harris proceeds to throw an interception. But pass interference is called, so the Riders get it back, but they still can't cash in. The Riders end up losing this game 35-33. And I want to point out that I don't think this was a case of the Bombers beating the Rough Riders. The Rough Riders had numerous chances to win this game, and they couldn't. This is the Rough Riders losing, not the Bombers winning. There is a difference, and it's very important to highlight that difference. Collaros played okay. He looked like the Collaros we have seen all season. He went 12 for 18 for 218 yards with a touchdown and interception. Not horrible, not great, just kind of there. And Winnipeg's ground game, it really wasn't there either. Brady Oliveira had 12 rushes for 42 yards, and backup quarterback Chris Streveler had 7 rushes for 12 yards, although he did manage to cash in twice with major touchdowns that ended up being a major difference maker in this very tight game. I think one of the major stats from this game, though, was Ontario Wilson getting just 3 catches, but managing to get an insane 75 yards. He played incredibly well this game, and I feel like without Wilson, I don't think the Bombers win this game. He was a major difference maker. As for the Rough Riders, this is really frustrating because Trevor Harris had one of his better games of the season this year. He threw 30 for 49 for an absurd 368 yards, 3 touchdowns, and no interceptions. Based off that stat line and that stat line alone, it sounds like the Rough Riders won this game. The running game continues to struggle without A.J. Ouellette. Frankie Hickson shows flashes of what he can do, but the issue is the other team's defense always adjusts to what he's doing, and he's unable to make an adjustment to that, which just leads to him having a game like this where he ended up getting 10 carries for just 32 yards. The Riders' receiving core, though, absolutely absurd. And they basically looked at the score and decided, we are going to single-handedly drag this team kicking and screaming into a competitive game. The Riders had 4 players who got over 50 yards receiving. Dante Miles had 5 receptions for 86 yards. Keyshawn Johnson had 8 receptions for 84 yards. Both of them had a touchdown. Keon Schaefer-Baker made his presence felt with 5 receptions for 79, although he was targeted 12 times. So that means 7 incompletions towards KSB, which is definitely notable for a receiver who's known for being so sure-handed. And that is something that I'm going to be paying attention to for the rest of the season as we get into the second half of it. Sam Emmerlis, he had another stellar game. He's having a tremendous season this year. On Labor Day, he had 5 receptions for 63 yards. And the other receiving touchdown went to Sean Bain Jr., who had his first touchdown since week 1. And had 3 receptions for 25 yards. The Riders' offense was solid. The defense was okay. But the Riders just could not finish this game. Like I said, this was not the Bombers winning. This was the Riders losing. They were given every chance at the end of the game to win it, and they couldn't. At the end of the day, it's games like that that could be the difference maker if the Riders make the playoffs or miss. If the Riders miss the playoffs, and the Bombers make it, how many people are going to be looking back at Labor Day and the Labor Day rematch and wondering what if the Riders could have won just one of those games? Now, let's move on to what I think was the biggest shocker from Labor Day weekend. Bo Levi Mitchell and the Hamilton Tiger Cats beat the Toronto Argonauts and Chad Kelly. What? I don't think anybody in the CFL saw this game coming. I looked at it on the schedule and I was like, oh, well, Toronto's just going to steamroll through Hamilton. It doesn't matter that Hamilton is the home team. Toronto has such a better team, and now that they have Chad Kelly back in the lineup, this game should not be close. Hamilton put up 21 points in the first quarter. 21. This game ended up being a lot closer than it should have been because Hamilton kind of took their foot off the gas after the first quarter. And after getting 21 in the first quarter, they got 6 in the second, nothing in the third, and just 4 points in the fourth. But when you win a game by 3 points, those 4 points were massive. They ended up being the difference maker in this game. Bo Levi Mitchell looked like the Bo Levi Mitchell of old. Though his completion percentage doesn't necessarily jump off the page, he went 20 completions on 30 attempts. He had an absurd 347 yards with 2 touchdowns and no interceptions. He looked good. But with that said, is he back? Not yet. Let's give him a couple more weeks to see if this was a trap game for the Argos, and that's why Bo Levi came firing, and he looked like the Bo Levi of old, and see if Toronto maybe just took the Ticats too lightly and let them get so far ahead in the first quarter that Toronto just couldn't catch up. Or if this is maybe Bo Levi turning a corner. I think this might have just been a trap game for the Argos, but we will see in the coming weeks. Meanwhile, on the ground, Greg Bell had a really sharp game. He had just 9 carries for 78 yards. That's it. 9 carries and he got 78 yards. That's nearly 10 yards a carry. He had 8.7 yards per carry with a longest carry of 17 yards. He looked really sharp in this game, and I can't help but wonder why Hamilton didn't utilize him more. And then for receiving, Tim White, who came into this season poised to be the #1 man in Hamilton for their receivers. He came in with expectations of getting well over 1,000 yards. And he has struggled up to this point in the season. Well, he listened to all the doubters and he said, you know what, no, forget you. I'm going to go out, I'm going to play my game, and I'm going to look good doing it. He had 6 receptions for 180 yards, including a long of 70 yards. He had the type of game receivers dream of. An absolutely absurd performance from him. And then if we look at the Argos, Chad Kelly played solid. He threw 30 passes just like Bo Levi. He had 24, so he beat Bo Levi in that stat. He threw for less yards than Bo Levi. He threw for just 322, and he had a touchdown to add on, but also threw an interception. Chad Kelly's been very hot and cold since he's come back. His yards have been amazing, but his touchdown to interception ratio has been questionable. I'm not sure if this is going to become a long-term issue for Chad Kelly, or if it's just maybe he's still somewhat doubting himself from the East Final where he threw countless interceptions to the Alouettes. Meanwhile, on the ground, Toronto has had a quietly very solid ground game this season. Kadeem Carey had another really sharp game, 12 carries for 78 yards. You can't get upset about that. Carey has been a rock for the Argos all season long. He has provided them much needed stability, and he has had a really good season, even if you don't hear people talking about it a whole lot. Receivers had a solid game for Toronto as well. Most notably, David. Now, I apologize if I butcher this last name. David Ungo the third had 4 receptions on 4 targets for 78 yards. Devaris Daniels also had a very solid game with 7 receptions for 74 yards and a touchdown. The Argos played solid after the first quarter. And the first quarter, when they gave up 21 points, that just killed any chance they had at winning this game. And finally, we move on to the Battle of Alberta. The Edmonton Elks travel to Calgary to take on the Stampeders. The Elks won, and they looked good doing it. McLeod Bethel Thompson had his best game of the season, and it will likely be his best game of the season at the end of the year still. He had 25 completions on 36 attempts. He threw for an absolutely astounding 486 yards. Let me say that again. On 25 completions, he threw for 486 yards. He also added 3 touchdowns without any interceptions. He looked like the MBT that we were expecting coming into this season. His longest pass though was quite funny in my opinion, because it was a 106-yard play that basically only had any life because the receiver fumbled the ball and Tevin Jones picked it up and ran. He just booked it and he didn't score. 106-yard play and you don't score. I love the CFL sometimes because it gives us stats like that. And when I say I love the CFL sometimes, I mean like 99% of the time. And the bizarre stats like this is one of the many, many reasons I love it. Because I challenge anyone who watches this video, find me another play in any football league that is college or better. So college, semi-pro, professional, so like NFL, CFL, UFL, AFL, even the AAF, semi-pro ball like Regina Thunder, college ball or university ball in Canada. Find me another play that goes for over 100 yards without a touchdown. I don't think you can do it. This is absurd. And, but anyway, enough with that absolutely absurd play. It'll be linked in the comments down below if you want to go watch the crazy play. Let's continue talking about these stats. The Elks had a really impressive running game, despite the fact not one particular rusher stood out. They had 2 rushers who both had solid games. Javon Lee carried the majority of the load with 10 rushes for 53 yards, and Kevin Brown had a decent game, getting 9 carries for 35 yards. It didn't really jump off the page, but I mean, both players played well. They had close to 90 yards combined. Can't ask for much more when you have 2 running backs splitting the duties. Now let's talk about their receivers. 3 players had over 100 yards. From least of those 3 to most, we had Eugene Lewis, who had 6 receptions for 112 yards and a touchdown. Curly Gittens Jr. having 7 receptions for 115 yards. And as I mentioned before, Kevin Jones had a game, to say the least. He had 208 yards in this game. 5 receptions. Every pass that went his way, he caught. He had a great game. Meanwhile, for Calgary, oh boy, I was very high on Jake Mayo for the majority of this season, but I'm starting to wonder how much longer he has to prove himself in Calgary. He played okay. He went 22 for 34 for 297 and a touchdown. But here is why I just say, okay, those stats are decent until you look at the other half of the touchdown to interception ratio. 4. He threw 4 interceptions in Calgary's biggest regular season game of the year. That's inexcusable. I don't care who you are. You could be Tom Brady for all I care. If you throw 4 interceptions, you're on the bench. I don't care. Logan Barno came in. He didn't really have much time to do much. He went 4 for 6 for 33 yards. That's about all there really is to say about him. Receiving was solid for the Stampeders, most notably Reggie Begelton had 7 receptions for 118 yards. But when your quarterback throws 4 interceptions, it is a miracle when you lose only by 15. Final score was 35-20. Jake Mayo is running out of time in Calgary. Honestly, he may already be out of time. And now we move on to week 14, the week of Labor Day rematches, the second half of the home and home series for most teams. I say most teams because they actually opened up with a new matchup that didn't happen over Labor Day, because the BC Lions traveled to Montreal to take on the, at that point, the 1-loss Alouettes. The Lions won. They won. That is the kind of win that can change a season for a team. And I'm not talking about negatively impacting the Alouette season. I'm talking about how this might be one of the wins that just marks a massive change in fortunes for the Lions. Coming into Labor Day, they were struggling quite a bit. And now they have back-to-back wins against very solid Eastern opponents. And Rogue, he looked okay in this game. He looked okay. He went 22 for 28. Amazing. Great stat line. He had 300 yards, 304 yards to be exact. Very solid passing yardage. Threw a touchdown. Awesome bonus. Wait, what do you mean he threw 3 interceptions? Yeah, so despite playing pretty good and only throwing 6 incompletions all game long, half of the passes that didn't find his receivers found Alouettes instead. Yeah, that's less than ideal. Bottom line is BC won, and outside of that, they looked really solid, especially Stanback, who once again just continued to have just has continued to have a tremendous season. Like I said before, this game he had 20 carries for 128 yards, which very solid, very solid. Alexander Hollins led the receiving for the Lions with 6 receptions for 78 yards. Very solid day for the Lions. Meanwhile, for Montreal, Fajardo played solid. It's not like this loss is on him. Cody Fajardo played solid. He didn't play like the amazing level we've seen from him so far this season, but he played solid regardless. He went 27 for 37 for 240, threw a touchdown and an interception. Pretty average game. I don't think this loss is on him. But on the ground, the Alouettes continued to struggle. Cody Fajardo was their leading rusher with 34 yards on 5 carries. Meanwhile, their starting running back, Walter Fletcher, had 6 carries for just 21 yards. He has continued to struggle this season on the ground. But through the air, that's how the Alouettes have started getting him the ball and started getting him yards. Through the air, he was targeted 8 times, caught all 8, and he got 72 yards. He has looked very solid in when running routes out of the backfield, and he's looked very good in when he's been passed the ball, but he just has really struggled to run this season. I'm not overly sure what's going on with that, but the Alouettes are going to need to get it figured out if they want to repeat as Grey Cup champions. They have had a very good season so far, but their rushing game, their struggles in that might be starting to catch up to them. They lost to the Lions, who had a very well-rounded attack, and the Alouettes did not. That might have been a major difference maker. Then we move on to the other game that wasn't a rematch. We move on to the Toronto Argonauts and the Ottawa Redblacks, and this game got out of hand. 41-27 for Ottawa. What? I thought the way that the Argo fans talked, they were talking like the Argos would be automatically become the best team in the league again just because Chad Kelly was back. Do not get me wrong, Kelly had a good game, but that is not enough to change the fortunes of a team that has been very average. I know I am saying this as a Riders fan. This isn't exactly something I should be talking about, but at the end of the day, just because Toronto got their quarterback back, it doesn't mean they're all of a sudden a new team. Kelly played solid, but again, threw a lot of interceptions. His final stat line was 36 for 56 and 56 passes. I'm going to get more into that in a few moments, but 56 is absurd. He had 463 yards. That's insane. I don't care how many passes you throw. When you can do that in a football game, that's impressive. He threw 3 touchdowns and, like I said, continued to throw a lot of interceptions. He threw 4 in this game. But let's talk a little bit more about 56 passes. I mentioned before in the episode, Toronto has had a very quietly impressive season for the rushing game. Kadeem Carey has had a great year so far. People aren't talking about it enough, in my opinion. He got the ball 5 times in this game. 5. That's it. He had an average of 9.2 yards per carry in this game, and they only gave him the ball 5 times. He had 46 yards. He was having a good game when he got the ball, but he didn't get enough to have an impact on the game. Now, obviously, the passing game, it was decent for Toronto. And I get you're going to want to pass the ball more when you have a quarterback who ends up throwing for north of 450 yards. But you can't abandon the run game when it's been a big part of your success this season. The receivers had a solid game as well. They had a pair of receivers who were over 100 yards. Mackay Polk had 7 receptions for 105, and David Unger the third had 8 receptions for 131 yards. Very solid performance from the receivers. And then we look at the Red Blacks. This is what made this game so interesting, because Drew Brown, yes, he had a very solid game, but his game kind of pales in comparison to Chad Kelly, who had over 450 yards. Drew Brown had 349. Tremendous game. He threw a touchdown, no interceptions, went 30 for 40. Very solid game. No one's talking about it. No one. I don't know why. I just haven't seen people talking about it. But, like I said, 41 points is an absurd total. The Red Blacks had everything going this game, honestly. Their ground game definitely, well, it was the exception to the rule, so to say. Their defense was solid. Yes, they still gave up 27 points, but their defense looked very good. Receivers, I mean, Dominic Rhymes, he was Dominic Rhymes out there. He looked tremendous. 10 receptions for 138 yards. Very good game. Let's talk about the name Banjo Bowl. The Banjo Bowl sounds like a fun name. Like, oh, is it like because there was a lot of banjo players in Saskatchewan, or is there a lot in Winnipeg? Maybe a famous player from one of the teams past used to play a banjo and they played it before the game and voila, you've got the game's name. No, it's nothing fun like that. It came from 2003 when Winnipeg Blue Bombers place kicker Troy Westwood said that Saskatchewan fans were a bunch of banjo-picking inbreds. Yeah, that's not exactly a great comment. Look, I understand 2003 was a different time. 2004 was a different time, which is when the game was officially given the name the Banjo Bowl. But at the end of the day, we are 20 years down the line from it. When you look at the origins of this name, why are we still using it? It is an offensive name. At the end of the day, if it had been said even 5-10 years later, he would have gotten a lot of trouble for it, and rightfully so. Now, maybe I'm just someone on the internet who's offended about a comment that was made 20 years ago. That, I mean, like, there's no shortage of them in any circle on the internet. Any. But look, it is 2024. If you look at this name and you look at the origins of it and you're not sitting there wondering why we still call it the Banjo Bowl, I don't know what to say. Like, I don't know. Maybe I'm biased. I'm from Saskatchewan, so I probably am biased. Because that comment was directed at people from my province. But who knows? Maybe I'm just getting overly emotional about something that's been around for almost as long as I've been alive. But regardless, let's talk about the game. Because the game, once again, was very interesting. So, let's start with UF Riders. Trevor Harris looked very average in this game. Again, Harris ended up going 21 for 33 for 287 through 2 touchdowns and 2 interceptions. I mean, like, that's kind of how he has played since returning from injury this season. And, I mean, I continue to hear a lot of people talking about Harris and wanting him benched for Patterson. And I know Harris is not the same player he was before, like a few years back, but at the end of the day, he is still the leader of this team. He is the man in Saskatchewan. Maybe next season Patterson will be the starter and Harris might be a coach or something. But this season, it is still Harris's team. I think the Riders should stick with Harris. I don't think he has been the main reason for the losses. I don't even fully know what the main reason is, but I know for a fact the main reason for him is not Trevor Harris. Maybe it has something to do with the fact we're missing AJ Ouellette. Because once again, Hickson played solid for a bit and started to struggle once the other team adjusted. Hickson had 9 carries and had 46 yards on the day. Not bad for a first half. For a full game, that's less than ideal. And then let's talk receivers. Keon Schaefer-Baker really had the kind of game we've been waiting to see from him basically all season long. On 6 receptions, he had 120 yards, with his longest being an 81-yard bomb. Sam Emmerles also had a very solid game. 4 receptions for 66 yards, including a 52-yard play. I love the Riders receiving core. I feel like it is the deepest in the league. I feel like no matter who is injured of the Riders receiving core, they can find someone on the roster who can at least pick up a good chunk of the slack. And now let's talk about the Bombers. Zach Collaros, his average season continues. Collaros went 24 for 31 for 231 and a touchdown. Solid game. It was good enough to get the win. Can't really complain about it if you're a Winnipeg fan. On the ground, Oliveira definitely struggled to find his footing in this game. He had 11 carries for 43 yards. But let's talk about the receiving core, because although there wasn't like one player who really stood out, I feel like the fact that the Bombers had so many players getting decent amounts of yardage in this game, that was a major difference maker in this game. So, every player who had 20 or more yards in receiving, from the lowest to the highest, we had Ontario Wilson having a 24-yard catch, and then Drew Wolodarski, 3 receptions for 29 yards. Nick Dembski had a solid game with 7 receptions for 46 yards. Dembski has been probably one of the best pickups for Winnipeg in the last decade. Basically, him and Collaros have probably been the best within the last 10 years. And then Brady Oliveira, he made up for his lack of production on the ground with 60 yards receiving. 6 receptions for 60 yards. Very good receiving game for him. Very meh running game for him. And then Kenny Lawler had a very sharp game as well, getting 6 receptions for 64 yards and a touchdown. So, the Bombers end up winning this game 26-21 after the Riders once again failed to finish in a game. That has been the story of the season for the Rough Riders, and I feel like this is another case of the Riders losing more than it is about the Bombers winning. It's very odd to see a team that has, in my opinion, such a strong coaching staff and a very skilled locker room continuing to be unable to finish these tight games. Almost every loss this season, if not every loss this season, has been within 1 score for the Riders. They are right there consistently, but yet they haven't won since July 19th. Maybe it's just because there was such a big overhaul in the offseason, and as other teams have had to bond with players who've known each other longer, the Riders have had to try and forge entirely new relationships between many players. Maybe that's something causing issues in late stages of the game. I honestly don't know. I just hope the Riders can get figured out, and soon. They are headed into a bye week this week. This is coming at a very important time. Hopefully they can get some healthy bodies back, and hopefully they can figure out what is going wrong in their games. And finally, we end with the second half of the home and home series with the Stampeders and the Elks. And once again, the Elks dominated the Stamps. 37-16. Logan Bono played in this game instead of Jake Mayo. He went 21 for 36 for 284 and threw a whopping 5 interceptions. So it would appear like he's not the solution. I'm not sure if you go back to Jake Mayo this upcoming week, in the next game, or if you go back to Bono, give him another chance, or if you try the other quarterback on the roster. I don't know what you do if you're Calgary, because your quarterbacks are all struggling right now. You need to get this figured out if you want to stay competitive in the West. The West is an incredibly tight division right now. Almost every team is within a game or two of each other. So every single game matters. But finally, Calgary has started to get something going with their ground game. It wasn't necessarily a super impressive game, but they had two players have okay games. Dedrick Mills had 14 carries for 65 yards. I mean, it's not bad. Peyton Logan had 5 for 25. I mean, that's not bad either. Maybe the solution to Calgary's running game issues is platooning? I honestly don't know. Calgary is a very confusing team to me this season, and they have been for the last couple seasons, but this season more so than really any other season I can remember. Now, despite the struggles of Bono, Reggie Begelton, well, he's Reggie Begelton. He still had a very solid game. 8 receptions for 123 yards. And now, let's talk about the Elks. So, McLeod Bethel-Thompson came down from arguably one of his best career games and had once again a very average game. He went 15 for 25 for 219, threw a touchdown and an interception. Trey Ford has been given the nod for this upcoming week, so he will be the starter again, sending MBT back to the backup slot. It's a very solid backup to have, but I still feel like this is the right move, putting Ford back on the field. I feel like he is one of the best quarterbacks in the league, and I'd say between him and Nathan Rourke, those two are the future of quarterbacks in the Canadian Football League. Meanwhile, Edmonton's ground game, it was very solid, and I see a lot of people talking about their three-headed monster in the run game. Rankin had 4 carries for 34 and a touchdown. Javon Leake had 10 carries for 55 yards, and Kevin Brown carried the heavy load with 12 carries for 91. It's impressive to have 2 running backs like that, let alone 3. I feel like Edmonton could end up being a very dangerous team down the stretch. Right now, if I'm a CFL coach, Edmonton is the last team I want to go up against. They are arguably the hottest team in the league right now since they have fired Chris Jones. I did not realize how much he was holding them back. And it has genuinely been impressive to watch this team go from the laughingstock of the league to a legitimate threat in every single game they play. So now the CFL is headed into week 15, and it's one of the few parts about the CFL season I dislike. 3-game weeks. There are only 3 games this week, meaning there are 3 teams that have a bye week this week. So, we open up the season with a very interesting quarterback matchup between Chad Kelly's Toronto Argonauts and Nathan Rourke's BC Lions. I feel like this is going to be a very important game for the Lions, because now they are coming off back-to-back major wins against very skilled teams, and now they're going up against a team that has a very skilled quarterback. I feel like if BC can win this game, they might end up being able to use this momentum to win the West and get the bye week headed into the playoffs. I feel like BC wins this game. I feel like it is a nail biter right down to the end, and I feel like both quarterbacks throw for more than 350 yards. This is my game of the week. Tonight we are starting the week off on a high note. Also, this game will be the Hall of Fame game, and I just want to quickly mention the players going into the Hall of Fame this season. So we have Marvin Coleman, Weston Dressler, Vince Goldsmith, S.J. Green, Jouch. I apologize if I mispronounced that name. Ed Laverty and Chad Owens. That is an amazing class of All-Stars. I feel very blessed to be able to say I grew up watching a good amount of those players, namely Chad Owens, S.J. Green, and of course home team boy Weston Dressler. I love Dressler. I called him Super 7 growing up. I loved watching him play. To this day, he's still one of my favorite players in CFL history. All these players deserve to go into the Hall of Fame. Congratulations to all of them. And then on September the 14th, Saturday, we have another Battle of Ontario. We have Ottawa traveling to Hamilton. Yeah, Ottawa wins, and it's not going to be close. I feel like after Hamilton escaped with a win in Labor Day after a trap game, I feel like Ottawa's going to be very aware of that, and they're not going to give Hamilton any room to wiggle. I feel like Ottawa just kind of runs through Hamilton, and it's not going to be close. I think Drew Brown has a tremendous game. I feel like the ground game for Ottawa just lights it up as well, and I'd be very shocked if Rhymes is held under 100 yards. And we finish off with what at the beginning of the season would have been a very intriguing matchup to me. And now I look at it and I'm just like, oh, well, that's a boring way to end the week. We have the Montreal Alouettes against the Calgary Stampeders. As of recording, I don't know who will be starting for the Stampeders. But I feel like no matter who they put in at the pivot, yeah, Montreal wins. It's not going to be close. This is going to be a week with 2 blowouts and 1 tight game. And we're going to start with a very tight game between Toronto and BC and have back-to-back blowouts on Saturday. I feel like it's still going to be a very interesting week to watch shape up. But I feel like 2 of these games are going to be very ugly to watch if you're cheering for Hamilton or Calgary. And finally, let's talk about the Swift Current Broncos. So, first things first, I want to talk about Swift Current Broncos going to NHL rookie camps. So, players who can't come back this season. Owen Pickering, the former captain, he will be at Pittsburgh Penguins training camp. I think he has a very, very good chance at not just staying around with the organization. I feel like he will likely play a non-insignificant amount of games for the Penguins this season. I feel like 30 would be a reasonable number to set as a minimum for Pickering this season. I feel like he has a very bright future in Pittsburgh. And Ryan McCleary will be at Toronto Maple Leafs camp. Hometown kid, you gotta love it. You gotta love seeing players go from their hometown team to the big leagues. Massive congratulations to both players on just amazing WHL careers and good luck in the big leagues. As for players who theoretically could return but probably won't, there's just one in my opinion. Connor Geekie. Geekie theoretically could come back for a second season with the Broncos. It would be his only full season with the team, but considering how much Tampa gave up to get him, I feel like he will not only be staying with the Tampa Bay Lightning organization, I feel like he'll be with the NHL team for the majority of the season. I wouldn't be surprised to see him get playtime in October, honestly. As for players who I think will probably come back, we have Luke Misselbacher with the Winnipeg Jets, Connor Vidston with the Boston Bruins, Jakub Dvorak with the LA Kings, Josh Philman with the New Jersey Devils, Reed Dick with the Utah Hockey Club, and Clark Caswell with the Seattle Kraken. Now, you guys may have noticed one name on that list who you might be a little shocked to hear me say I think they will probably be back this season. Reed Dick. I feel like he will be going into camp with the Utah Hockey Club and be expected to just kind of not just be like NHL ready now. I feel like they might be hoping he's ready to start now. And if he's not ready to be their number one goalie this season, I feel like they're just kind of going to be like, you know what? No, don't even play in the AHL. Go back to the WHL. I feel like of the players who will probably come back this season, he has the highest expectations at NHL Rookie Camp. And that's not a knock against the other players who I think will probably be back this season. I just feel like that Reed Dick is just going to have way too high expectations. And even if he has a stellar rookie camp, I feel like Utah still has the same management structure to my understanding. I would not be shocked if they just completely biff it and just ignore Reed Dick entirely. I feel like he'll be back, but I also feel like without Reed Dick, it's going to be a very rough start to the season for the Broncos. The Broncos season starts not today, but next Friday on September 20th. They will be welcoming the Saskatoon Blades to town. I think that is going to be a very fun game, and I feel like it could be a very tight game. I want to look a little bit more in depth before I probably do a breakdown for this game. But I do want to talk about the season as a whole coming up, because I feel like one of two things will happen for the Broncos. I feel like they will either be one of the best teams in their division, and they will be challenging to win the conference, maybe the division, or they are going to be one of the worst teams in the league and struggle all season long. I think if they end up being on the better side of things, they will sell a lot of their younger players for players who are ready to win an edge north now, instead of trying to build for the future, which is what I think would happen if they are struggling. If they are struggling at the deadline, I feel like they will trade a lot of players such as Reed Dick. But with that said, it does not change the fact I'm incredibly excited for this season. I know there's not going to be much of an in-between with this team. If they're either amazing or awful, I don't think that in-between exists. But it does not change the fact I'm amped for this season. I feel like it's going to be a very fun season, regardless of how the team does. I'm just very excited to get it going. I'm Canadian. I love hockey. What can I say? But that is everything I have for you guys this week. If you enjoyed this episode, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe if you're on YouTube. And if you're on Spotify, be sure to follow the 13th Man Podcast Network. I hope you guys have a great day. I hope you guys have a great night. I hope you guys have a great whatever. Stay safe, stay strong, you got this. And this is Jackie for Prairie Sports Talk, signing off.